Easier to hear if I'm not going through 2 layers of fabric. All right. Good evening. It's good to be back among you. It's been a few years since I slipped in the back and worshiped with y'all on a Sunday morning. I think at that point it was right before Pastor Frank came. And we knew that a new pastor was going to be appointed, and so I was fairly new to the district, and it was a chance to get out and worship with y'all. And I haven't made it back since, so it's good to be back. I appreciate the invitation from my brother in the ministry. Let me give you just a minute about myself. And I haven't prepared a whole lot beyond that other than reading your paperwork. What was sent to me, and then I just like to have conversation with y'all. I am a second career pastor. My undergrad was in mathematics and computer science, and I was in mid-level management for a Fortune 500 telecommunications company that you may have heard of before, AT&T, doing software systems that supported the telephone network and quality and process management for those organizations. When, for about 3 years, I'd had this, God was working on me for something. I knew there was a next that was coming. I had no idea what the next really was. And pretty soon I realized that was a call to move from the pew to the pulpit. You see, I'd convinced God, well, I'd convinced myself that I was in ministry back there in the pew, and so I didn't need to step to the other side, and it took a few 2x4s upside the head before I figured it out. But I did, and so with 3 kids still at home, went to Methodist Theological School in Ohio. And while I was in seminary, I worked for the Columbus South District office as what was called a local church consultant at that time. The lay equivalent to the assistant to the DS is really what it was. My student pastorate was in Tarleton, South Perry, a 2-point charge down in the Hocking Hills. And then I went to Gates Fourth in downtown Columbus, an inner city, a church that had peaked at about 100 and gotten itself back down and really plateaued around 70, 75 when I got there. And was there for a couple of years, and it was starting to see some growth when I was appointed to Church of the Messiah in Westerville as pastor of Faith Formation. And so I served up there in one of our largest congregations. And then the call came in, and my secretary said, Wendy Marcus, the DS, is on the line. And I had just been in a meeting with him on a conference committee. I picked up the phone. Hi, Marcus, how's it going? It's going good. This is the call. I said, I'm sorry, you have the wrong number. And he laughed, I laughed, and learned that I was being appointed to Athens First, down just on the edge of the OU campus as lead pastor. Spent 4 years down there where we went through the MCCI, Missional Church Consultation Initiative process. And as we were in that 4th year, I was beginning to discern that God was saying, I think you've done what I needed you to come here to do. And about 2 weeks later, I got a call from the superintendent that Reverend Dr. Jocelyn Roper would be calling me because Bishop Palmer intended to appoint me as assistant to the DS in Miami Valley. And so we packed up once more and we headed to Dayton. And I'm starting year 7 here, those first 6 as assistant to the superintendent. And then this year on July 1, was appointed to be a regional missional specialist for the West Ohio Conference, which I think kind of means being assistant to the DS for probably 4 DSs, plus a whole lot of other stuff that I'm still figuring out what it means. But yeah, I'm under appointment and I go where the bishop sends me, and here I am. All that to say, I've been in every size church, from the 2-point charge to one of our largest congregations. I've worked in a variety of contexts and settings, from Appalachia to the suburbs to the inner city, to county seat university settings. And so I believe underneath all of that, God was working through me and the cabinet to prepare me to step into this place as a regional missional specialist. And so had great conversation when we met a couple weeks ago about the work that you all are doing here on clarifying mission and vision and putting together a task force to step towards enacting that. And just making myself available to have conversation around that. I have made a few notes, but I trust that we'll get there as the conversation goes on. So how would you all like to use this time with me tonight? Questions, comments? Do you want to give me your version? Not just what's on the paper, but your version of what all's going on here. Why don't we start there?
Well, my name is Bill Zimmerman, and unfortunately I got appointed to be in charge of the task force because I couldn't say no, but
that's a spiritual gift sometimes.
We just completed a service project, what we kind of titled Project Service Work. We assisted a group that has been for about 20 to 25 years coming in and preparing summer lunches. And found out that they were going to be a little on the short staff side. They had young ladies coming in, college, high school kids, part-time job, a couple hours a day, and they was going to use our facility. So we're trying to be more service in the community, and that was the first project that we kind of chose.
Good.
And we ended up having 11 different members of our congregation over a period of 9 weeks. Every day for 9 weeks, we served lunches at 2 different parks. Mm-hmm. And some days it was not very well attended, and other days, but that was just issues with things that wasn't in our control. We didn't have a problem with that.
Sure.
And we got through that project, and I thought it was a nice stepping stone to get started.
Yeah.
But we're searching for other things to try to do to become involved in the community. And that was just our initial program. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking for other ways to continue something along that lines.
Okay.
So.
Good. Thank you.
For me, I think the other side of it is this outward look to the community and how we are of service to the community, but the inward look on how we grow and how we're of service to each other, and how this small group of doers can become a larger group of doers, and how I keep going back to something Don said at our last night, how we bring people along to be disciples, how we make disciples, how we look inside in these 4 walls and become better at what we need to do so that we are better when we look outside as well.
It really is that both and that we're about. We don't nurture for the sake of nurture. We nurture so that we're equipped to go out. But in the going out, there's that reciprocal action of bringing in, and so having the ability to nurture there and that growth. And so that idea of creating, it's sometimes called a discipleship pathway, of how do you introduce folks to the faith? How do you invite them to take those initial steps into learning and growing, moving more into community and interaction, and then reaching out and serving and sharing story to bring others in who learn the faith, step in and continue that path. I was just actually having the conversation with the pastor out at Enid UMC that she's working on putting a discipleship pathway together for them that kind of does that basic function. One of my favorite images of that is called the ocean diagram. Dan Glover, who's the lead pastor now up at Tip City UMC, and Claudia Levy authored, the name of their book. I'm going to keep talking and then it'll come to me. But they use this ocean diagram, and the idea is when you go up and you're getting ready to enter the ocean, there are some of us who just run right in and dive in and go off into the deep water. Most of us, on the other hand, we get there and we kind of hang back, right? And we're kind of looking at the big picture, we're figuring out where to go in, we're seeing where everybody else is. And those are kind of like the folks who are checking us out, trying to figure out if this faith thing has anything worthwhile and might be worth engaging in. And so that's the initial seeker. But then that person eventually, maybe with a little help from a friend, goes up and kind of dips their toes in, right? So that's when they sneak in the back door 2 minutes after service has started so that nobody will see them, and they sit in the pew, they listen, they participate, they pray. Maybe they leave right away because they're not ready to engage, but they're dipping their toe in the water. From there comes the place where you get up to your knees in the water, right? And so that's where you decide to hang around and you have a cup of coffee. Maybe you get invited to a Bible study or to go out to breakfast with someone after. And you begin to interact in the life of the congregation. From there is stepping in waist deep. That's always where it gets me because it gets cold. And at that point, it's, will I become vulnerable? Will I let myself get into a small group, get to know a group of people, begin discussing, begin questioning, begin learning? And then there's walking out far enough where your feet go off the ground. And that's kind of that first inclination to serve. When I go out to the park to meet folks I don't know on behalf of Christ, or when I go to the inner city church to serve a breakfast, at St. Paul's in downtown Dayton. And then I'm out there, I'm swimming, and I decide it's time to free dive. And I'm gonna dive down to the bottom, and I'm gonna see it all, and life expands. Each of those, just as there's kind of that hurdle, if we think about walking into the ocean, we got to get used to our feet getting wet, then we got to get used to it on our belly button, then we got to get used to not having the ground underneath it. Just as there's a barrier for each of those, there's often a barrier for the individual to engage in that next level of discipleship. And so how do we as the church recognize what those barriers are at each step along the way, and what do we do to help folks overcome those? A lot of the hospitality on Sunday morning is around helping folks get over that barrier of just looking in the door to actually coming in and sitting down and feeling comfortable enough to stay. And so, thinking about, and I've been in the church all my life. I know not everybody has, but I know that's one of the drawbacks for me, because I'm comfortable coming into a church. And not everybody, increasingly more people, are not. And so trying to get into that mindset of what it's like for somebody who hasn't been in a church before, or hasn't been in a church in a long time, or had a really bad experience in a church, and thinking about how to help them overcome and move on to the next step, as well as those of us who have been sitting in the pew for a long time, but not doing much other than sitting in a pew. I'm sure there aren't any of those here, but just on the off chance that there was. How do, one of my favorite quotes is, the pastor's job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Oh, yeah. And so who's too comfortable where they are? Because nowhere do I see Jesus inviting the disciples to go get comfortable. He's always taking them to the next challenge, right? He's always pushing them out of their comfort zone, going to that next place to do ministry. And so but we stay in our comfort zones because it's hard. It's work. It's uncomfortable. So how do we recognize that and invite folks into that they may then grow and find a next comfort spot? And don't worry, when you get a little bit comfortable there, we'll help you get out of that too. Because this is a lifelong journey of growing. So I think you're right on. How do you create that discipleship pathway through combinations of studies and small groups and serving opportunities to continue to have opportunities to invite folks to take that next step in faith and continue to grow, as well as then when they get excited about what they're doing and invite somebody to come with them, there's something to support them to grow on that pathway as well. Yeah.
One of the pieces we've kind of talked about on and off is our goal was to create this vision. Where does it sit when we're done with it? Right, so we developed this pathway, and
But that isn't the pathway. The vision is not the pathway. The vision is your starting point, but your pathway is what you do to help people along the way.
Right, and so we have this plan. Where do we pass it off? Who do we pass it off to? It's up to all of us, but for me it feels like I would need a direction, right?
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Yeah.
Where have you seen that successfully fit in other places?
So when I was down, let's see, oh man, it's been 6 years. Will this come back to me? When I was down in Athens, our mission was to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. We stated our vision, and by vision we meant what we thought we were being called to be when we grew up. Loving God with all we are. No, wait, no, I need to. Knowing God, know, grow, show. Knowing God through Jesus Christ, growing in our faith and discipleship, showing God's love in our community and around the world. know, grow, show. And so we did a couple of things with that. One, we went through a simplification process and we aligned all of our ministries under either know, grow, or show, what their primary purpose was. Now that didn't mean that they couldn't blend into some others, but everything had to have a primary home, how it aligned with our vision. Because if we couldn't say how it aligned with our vision, then why were we doing it? That didn't mean that it wasn't a good thing to do, but it just meant maybe that wasn't what we needed to be doing now. And if we really thought that we should be doing it now, then did we have to go back and reconsider our vision? But we were pretty set on the vision. So we aligned all of our ministries under those 3 ministry areas. It may sound hokey, but at the top of all the leadership team agendas, the staff meeting agenda, and committee agendas was our mission and our purpose. And we recited it together to remind ourselves of why we were doing this at the beginning of every meeting. We didn't have pretty glass window wall at the back of our sanctuary. There were nice window doors at the bottom, but it actually had a balcony around. And so on the back of that balcony, we had painted know, grow, show God's love. So that when folks walked out, they saw what they were supposed to go do. And we developed, it was a traditional worship church. And so we had a sending forth, the closing of the worship every week was a responsive closing forth, or a responsive sending forth a hymn and then the benediction. And in the sending forth, we recited our vision statement every week. And whoever was liturgist would lead it off in the congregation to know God through Jesus Christ. The liturgist would say something to grow in our faith and discipleship, the liturgist to show God's love in our community and around the world. Within 6 months, that congregation knew its vision statement. They knew what we were about. We made it part of the liturgy, part of our work, and yeah. I've seen places where they've had a big wall hanging, not necessarily in the sanctuary, but like in a hallway or something, where that's enumerated, if there's some pictorial representation of that. I've seen churches do banners that hang in the sanctuary, that have something like that on it, if it lends itself to that. So you can get creative in how you weave it into the life of the congregation, so that it's repeatedly heard and it becomes formational and it becomes known. And then you've got the conversation to back it up. So how are we doing this? Well, we're doing this piece by blah, 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 blah. And to do this, we've got blah, 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 blah. And we don't have as many things maybe here now, but here's where we're envisioning growing that or something like that. But, yeah. And I see the possibility for that in what you're working on, doing that aligning. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Will you tell us more of your general spectrum of church consultation based on your experiences?
Yeah, so church consultation, we're no longer currently doing the missional church consultation out of the annual conference. But basically what that involved was a lot of base work by the congregation to understand who you are and who you believe God's calling you to be, and the community in which you're in. One of the things that I noted as I was reading through, have you had the opportunity to look at the Mission Insight website and the reports that come off of that?
I just came across.
Okay. I would encourage you to check that out. Terry in the district office can help get you. We've got a conference-wide subscription. It's a demographic database.
Okay. Oh, I see. Yeah.
And so all of our churches can get in there. You know, you put the address of the church, and you can do a 1 mile radius, a 5 mile
Yeah, I
radius,
saw
a
that.
10
I
mile
know that.
radius. You can draw if you want to do county lines, if you want to do school district lines, you can go in there and create your own boundaries. I've never gotten that fancy with it. But then it has a variety of demographic types of reports that you can get about your community to get insight into who is really living in a reasonable, that you're likely to draw to the church. And so the initial part of the consultation that we did down in Athens was really digging into those demographics, as well as looking at the history of who we were as a church and who we were now, and the leadership we had in place. Then from there, it was a lot of questioning folks on where they saw the strengths, where they saw areas for us to improve, and where they were sensing God calling the church to be 5 to 10 years from now. And after conversations amongst the leadership and others, then a team would kind of put a report together and give highlights of, here's what we think is doing well here, here are the areas that need some improvement, and here are the suggested areas to move forward on. A lot of those areas for improvement, and they were called prescriptions to move forward for the churches, are now showing up in the Multiply Minis that the annual conference is offering, because we were seeing this repeated need for this kind of teaching and learning across the annual conference. And so they're offering the Multiply Minis as webinars through the annual conference to help with that, and doing trainings along those kinds of lines through there as well. And so it's unique. There's a structure and a process to go through, but it ends up being unique to every congregation to know exactly who you are in your history, in your community, and to discern where God is calling you for that next faithful step. And I'm convinced that with each unique gathering of us as church, lay and clergy, there are the gifts and skills needed in that place for that time. And when a pastor moves on, or when the congregation changes out and there becomes that different mix, there's still that group of gifts and skills for who the community needs them to be at this time. And so part of it is getting to know your community and where the needs are and how those might intersect with the gifts that you all have. One of my favorite quotes is from Frederick Buechner, who says, the place where you are called is where your deepest joy meets the world's deep need. And I think that's true for us individually, which gives me comfort because it means I don't have to meet every need out there. I'm responsible for meeting the needs that God has gifted me to meet. But I think that's also true for us as church, where you have your joy as congregation is going to meet a need in the community. And that's what you've got to find within yourselves, identify within the community, and that's your sweet spot. That's the sweet spot for how to show God's love now. And it might change 2 years from now, and that's okay. But now, that's where it is. So whether it's in feeding, I saw that you hosted a lot of recovery groups. Maybe it's in providing hospitality. Where are you gifted? And how can that meet a need in the community?
The main purpose why we organized the task force is to preeminently prepare for the unpredictable, uncertain future in various ways. So it's an unprecedented way to explore. So we just think about our current situation in terms of the finance, and, congregation, and how to make people grow in faith. And so all those things are combined together. Yeah. So now we came to think about the reset our vision statement and mission clearly based on the UMC or mission statement to more specifically, clearly to easier to make people understood. So still we are struggling.
And that regular invitation to continue to grow deeper in your faith is so important. It's important for you who are leaders to know yourselves as growing in the faith, and how you're doing that. And then in that growing, we may think we know where that's going to lead us, but not always. God can surprise us in how we're equipped for a next that we never could have imagined, right? And so one of the ways that leadership in the church is different from leadership in a business setting is it is spiritual leadership. It needs to be grounded in that deep faith, and the values of that then move us forward with good stewardship, with good business practices and all those, not to negate those, but move us forward as a people of faith ready to meet whatever it is does come before us. We all, I trust there's awareness here of what's going on at the general church level, and that we're all still waiting for a general conference that was supposed to happen in 2020 and now is scheduled for 2022. And many of us are looking at the situation in the world and the vaccine rates, especially across Africa, and saying, I'm not sure I see a path to having a general conference even in general 2022. And so we live in the midst of this ambiguity, but yeah, we still have to be church now. We don't get a pass until general conference is held. We're called to be church now, and so how do we be faithful even in the midst of not knowing exactly what things will look like a year, 2 years from now, but trusting that when that time comes, we'll be prepared, we'll be equipped to move faithfully then into whatever that is. What would you all say are some of the signature ministries of this church?
One of them is we, as well as a couple other churches in here, have a food pantry right next door.
Yep, yeah.
And another, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but 2002, 2003, someone from this church decided we needed to start a ministry. And our mission project was in Tanzania. We started an orphanage.
Wow.
And it's a grassroots thing. We're known for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say that was two primary things that we're known for,
Yeah.
as well as the caramels. We always made caramels every year, but we haven't been able to do that for a while.
Yeah. There are quite a few churches in Miami Valley who make caramels. Was there somebody with a secret caramel recipe that was going around dropping it off at different United Methodist churches?
Started at South Park,
Exactly, South Park.
and they stopped doing it, but our recipe came from South Park.
Okay, so what about the West Carrollton Memorial? Because aren't they another caramel making church down at West Carrollton?
I'm not sure if they are or not.
I'm pretty sure.
The South Park Carmel, because I don't believe South Park is there, correct?
It is not.
Yeah.
It is not. It closed as South Park, reopened as neighborhood church, and the neighborhood merged with Oakwood. So South Park is
That big,
Is no
beautiful
more.
building is just.
Yeah,
yeah.
but that's where Jim and Barb got the
Yeah,
recipe.
That's where they got the recipe. So it is related. I should have known there was I should have known there was a
But
United
it was,
Methodist
it
connection.
was even,
I should have known.
it was even over into Indiana,
Really?
Eastern Indiana, and there was a church over there that did it, and they stopped doing it, and there was a lady who came over here from the other side of Richmond, and she said, I've been looking for these caramels all over, and she found them here, so we might be one of the last churches doing it.
Yeah. For some reason, I was thinking West Carrollton was still doing it. But I could be wrong. Of course, nobody was making them last year.
Yeah, nobody did it last year.
Yeah. So the food pantry, what else, what would your community miss if New Carlisle First wasn't here?
I know this is an odd statement, but we have the ballet downstairs in one of our large rooms. Because they went through such a disruption when they were no longer meeting at what used to be our YMCA. So they came here and started meeting, and that was just, it's an odd little thing, but it would be another disruption to them.
Mhm.
So those smaller community groups that come and can meet here. And for a while, the Optimist Club met here on Wednesday mornings and used our lounge. So just those outside groups, the recovery groups,
Recovery groups.
absolutely, the recovery groups
And the scouts
and the scouts.
use our building too. We even have a school upstairs.
Hmm.
It's its own entity.
Okay,
In
so
the
you,
building.
so you have a
Guiding
separate,
Shepherd Christian school.
okay.
I guess it's kind of ironic about this, that none of those people are members or
Right.
participate in that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're still separate entities.
Right. Yeah.
You know, figure out how to break through, I guess.
Well, and so some of the question there is, do those folks already have church homes? But if they don't, how do you build relationship that they know you here? It used to be we could count on people walking in the door to find a church. When, so, bit of church history. We went through what most of us see as the heyday and what we want to get back to as far as sanctuaries being full and how many people in worship and all of that, is actually an anomaly in the overall history of the church. There was this confluence of the end of World War II and the baby boom, and church became the third place for folks to go, to be known, to be seen. It's just where you went. It wasn't so much a lot of times about faith as it's just what you did. It was social. It was a conformity thing. That first half of the 20th century, conformity was one of the most prominent values in folks. And so you just did. But what also happened is those folks had a dear saint in my student parish, 80-some-year-old. His name was Robert. He was a widower. He was a grizzly bear that was really a teddy bear at heart, because he was always grumbling and griping about this and that. But I just knew there was a soft teddy bear under there, and I'd seen it several times. And we were having discussion, small church. We were all sitting around tables down in the fellowship hall. We'd had a meal. We were having a visioning session, and all of a sudden he says, "It's my fault." And the conversation had gotten into kind of the we and they, we in the church and they in the community who don't come to church anymore. You've never had those conversations, I'm sure. And he says, "It's my fault." And there's multiple conversations going on around the table at this time, and I kind of hear him. And so I paused, and he says it again louder, and everybody gets quiet. And the little ladies on each side of him were kind of patting his shoulders. "Oh, Pop, it's not your fault. It's okay. I'm sure it's not your fault. What's not your fault?" And he says, "It's my fault. My son's not in church and isn't raising my grandkids in church." There was like dead silence. And he says, "You know, when my buddies and I were in those foxholes over in Europe, fighting the Nazis, going into concentration camps, we promised ourselves that we were not going to raise our kids to just conform, to just do what you're told. We were going to raise them to ask questions, to make decisions for themselves. And so we did that. Now you think about the generation that they raised. You're talking the Woodstock generation. You're talking about the generation that wasn't about conformity, that was about asking questions. And he says, and so we taught them to ask questions, but when they came to church and wanted to ask questions about their faith, we told them questions weren't allowed here, they just had to believe. Because we didn't know the answer to the questions. We had just been told to believe, and so we just did. And so they left because they weren't welcome here. And it's my fault that my kids aren't in church. And I thought, man, what a truth. So many of my generation left the church as young adults because their questions weren't welcomed. And they went out to seek meaning and purpose and God somewhere else. And so how do we, and so that turned the tide of folks. And now we're back probably at a percentage of population that's more typical throughout Christian history. But it feels like sanctuaries who were built for the anomaly are empty. And we have this mental picture of what we want to go back to. But I'm not even sure that that was faithfulness, really. It might have been a lot of people, but I'm not sure how faithful that really was. And so how do we, as leaders, come to understand what is the faithfulness that God is asking of us today and articulate that to our congregations? And it might be okay if that sounds and looks different than what some people think faithfulness might look like. But if they're called into leadership, they can be part of that conversation and part of that discernment too. And so how do we become the church that the community needs today? How do we be that place that people can come with their questions? A place where they can learn how to read Scripture, learn how to study Scripture, learn the spiritual disciplines to grow in their faith, have a place to serve, learn about the faithfulness of stewarding our money, and so have opportunity to give back to the work of the church. And in that, be that place where we can invite others in to experience God, experience Christ, experience transformation, and grow in their own faithfulness. But it's going to take inviting them back in, because most aren't going to wake up some Sunday and say, it's a good Sunday to start going back to church again. That's not in general where folks are. And so it's going to take that invitation, it's going to take those relationships. And so how does the food pantry, or how does this lunch ministry, how is it as much about building relationships as it is the transactional giving the food, giving the lunch? how do you get to know the people who are there, hear their stories, hear what they're longing for, searching for? Maybe then you find the opening to say, hey, at First Church, we do, or we have. Would you meet me there? And let me introduce you to somebody who might be able to help you, or I'll sit with you in worship on Sunday. Come, can I pick you up and we'll sit and worship together on Sunday morning? And through that relationship, invite in.
Had an incident that happened this summer during one of the lunch things. Our church was trying to improve our media. And somebody mentioned something about that, and they went and looked at our website. And so that was an invitation,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't know what their response was. And there's no ability to follow up on some
Yeah,
of that.
figuring out how to follow up.
Yeah. So that's something
Yeah.
we're trying to work on.
Yeah, yeah. And some of that even becomes, how do you collect information about who you're serving or who's participating so that you can follow up and see how they're doing. A lot of, one of the trainings that happens with the MCCI process was around doing big events. A lot of churches will do a back to school bash, or maybe it's a trunk or treat or something like that. And how to turn that from a one stage event to kind of a 3-stage event. What's all the prep work you do prior to that, but then during the event, how do you collect information and things like that, and then how do you follow up with that? How do you bring them back in for something else? Maybe it's a ticket to return and exchange for something on a Sunday morning, but how do you take it from a one-time interaction to multiple interactions, and through that begin to develop relationship and help them see you as a congregation?
Early on, I think I heard you mention that Enon is also doing a similar exercise right now. It's trying to build out their discipleship pathway.
Yeah.
Have you ever known of, they're a similar kind of size. I grew up with the Schlesingers there. I love them. and I know that they left a great foundation at that
Mhm.
church, right?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you've ever seen a couple churches work together, not to have the same thing, but to have a different viewpoint when you're kind of in the same mindset.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, one of the things that we're working on at the conference level right now is a way to kind of help multiple churches come together, clergy and laity, to support one another in ministry, whether it's through common mission projects or whatever that looks like. But certainly there's opportunity, and I don't know if you might know Heather Husted. She was in Springfield, but she's provisional elder as well, and looking to go for ordination, to her ordination interview this year. So you may have been in the same class.
What is her name?
Heather Husted?
No, I haven't ever.
Okay. She just got appointed to Enon July 1st, but she's doing it as her ordination project. They have to write a curriculum study, and so she's creating kind of this pathway and some classes that go along with that as part of her ordination project. But I think that certainly would be beneficial to work together, especially with similar sized churches, sharing resources, even holding classes together, potentially. We've, even at the conference level, our candidacy summit and licensing school are now West Ohio and East Ohio together. It's the same basic curriculum. Folks get to know one another. In that larger class, you've got more opportunity for interaction and learning and all of that, more energy that happens. And yeah, so that could certainly.
They're a similar kind of community, and they're facing a similar challenge. I mean, that would just be very interesting.
Yeah.
Pairing, and that idea of even doing some classes together, or, small group work or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, I would let everybody come here first year in your life, just go. Right? It's not a competition, for me, it's not a competition. It's
Exactly.
all heading in the same direction, and
Exactly.
they're just down the road.
Yeah. We've started doing, during the pandemic, we moved lay servant ministry classes online. And so now, I had been trying for years to try to get kind of like a conference-wide view of who's doing what class when. And you could figure it out, but when you had to drive 3-4 hours, whatever, to attend, it wasn't always that practical. But now, I just got done teaching a class, and I had somebody from Lycopolis on the east side of Columbus, and somebody from down outside Cincinnati, as well as folks from Miami Valley, and we were all online together, and it was great interaction. So, yeah, certainly within as close as you all are to Enon. And then even, I'm just trying to think geographically what might be some of the other churches about this size. I'd have to go back and stare at my map. But possibilities for doing ministry together, absolutely. Great idea.
While Sue and Son, when we did that, I was thinking, have you ever had a case where like 2 or 3 smaller churches did that? They took turns having it, so, because,
Yeah.
if you have it in one place all the time,
Absolutely.
somebody's gonna be driving further, but I was thinking like, we use Enon, ordering it back and forth.
Absolutely.
And after a long period of time, if you give me a few more people in there, then they may kind of go back to whichever church they're closest to on the other activities, not that one thing doing the other, but, go back and forth, so 1 week is one church, next the other church. So for any given week, half of it may go a little further than the other half, but
Yeah.
over a month it even out. So, it's sort of time and all that, would be all one size.
Absolutely. Travel around and experience different ministry settings, and some of our churches, I'm thinking out in Preble County, I know for Lent, the United Methodist churches always come together, and they do a worship and a meal, and I don't know if they do a study associated with it as well, but they travel around to a different church each Sunday evening in Lent, and so they're all together to worship. They get to hear the different pastors. They're able to sit together at table, and so whether it's some so a lot of churches do that seasonally for something like that. But I think there's opportunity to do that even on an ongoing basis somewhat, for different types of classes and small groups.
There was a time though, when Bethel churches united, we would do that with the other denominations. You know,
That's
we would
exactly
do
what I
a
was-
travel.
Yeah,
That's what I was thinking, was the Bethel Churches United, that was, and it seemed like all the churches that were involved had, like, we had the food pantry,
They had
somebody else
clothing.
had the clothes closet, somebody else had the furniture, yeah, so we all used our different gifts. And then we also worshiped together
Yeah.
seasonally.
yeah,
We had different worship services at
Yeah.
the different churches.
yeah.
Yeah, so. Yeah, and the choirs would come together and sing, but unfortunately, all those pastors have gone away, and all those congregations have,
Well, the pandemic is.
yeah, I mean, the pandemic had a lot to do with it,
That
but,
changed so much.
also,
Yeah.
it's all the inner city churches, like us and the Brethren and the Presbyterians, that seem to be struggling, I guess, for lack of a better word.
So there's a lot of churches in this community.
Yeah,
Yeah, we always had just a number of churches for the size, we had a lot. Several pastors, like the Senate, the Presbyterian, and everything, they just got some, other churches, and we had
We
a lot of
also
churches
have-
at one time for ourselves.
We also have two large,
Yes.
non-denominational, churches within a stone's throw here,
Yeah.
that draw very large congregations. And
Yeah.
not disparaging them at all, right? It is just a challenge for us. That is not who we are.
That, and so, claiming
Yeah.
who you are and
Yes.
articulating
Yes.
who you are.
we are not a contemporary service church,
We are not.
and whatever Restoration Park is.
Well, so it's another.
And,
Well,
and,
Medway is not non-denominational, they're Methodist.
Well,
but-
understood.
Whether they want to be considered Methodist or not, they're Methodist. We won't go there right now.
So
no,
the
we won't
claiming
go
of
there.
who we are and what we are is important in this.
And doing that with excellence. And doing that with excellence. I talked earlier about, aligning ministries within your vision. And even once aligning, then, it's kind of like so in my clothes closet, I had this practice of, if I wore a jacket, I would move it to the front of the closet. And by the end of the season, I'd see how many I hadn't worn, right? But I like them. I don't want to get rid of them. And so I actually, because now I'm an empty nester, I could move those to the spare closet, and I'd give it a year to see if I actually went and to use it again. You like that?
I totally feel you.
But it's okay to have 10 and not 20, or 5 and not 10.
And do those five
And-
really, really well.
And do those really, really well. And so, and again, it's not that those others are not good to do, but right now, how do we make the most impact for the kingdom? And focus the energy on those. And that's okay. Find that one or two things that you do really well, and do it well.
Have you ever seen one, maybe, it's just an idea, is it maybe better after we come to a Sunday class first, I'm thinking, church, you don't have the intimacy, as if there, married them, and they stayed there, and she was born and lived there until about 2.5 years ago. And he decided he would arrive in Jones, Korea, born and raised in Korea, and she don't know where you grew up. I decided wasn't sure she grew up in Seoul. I think she don't know if he still spoke Korean well, and she seemed really interested in making a call. But then they ended up coming here, because she said her dad wanted to find out was on to live in America.
Hmm.
So they came here a couple of years ago, and they're still over here. They came in Ohio because she had a grandmother that lived right around here close. She didn't say about her mom and dad, why? Because she said her mom's from California. But talk about man connection.
Yeah.
That's the reason why I think it's a good stuff.
So I think there's not one entry way into the church. But there can tend to be places that it's easier for folks to enter. One of those places is actually serving, because you're doing something. And so in that way, the conversation that you do have can feel a little less intimate and a little easier, right? So serving is often an entry point for folks. Worship is often an entry point. And while some folks may walk in by themselves, inviting somebody to come to worship with you helps them know someone, and can often make that easier. I think what can happen, let me move on and then I'll come back to that. Coming into a small group or a Bible study first, unless you already know the folks, can be awfully intimidating because it's an intimate setting. If you're doing discussion and it gets very deep, you're bearing your soul. Now, that being said, if relationship has already built up, and then you invite someone into that study, then certainly, but as a first entry point for somebody new coming into a Sunday school class that's already been established, that would be like my worst nightmare if I was having to walk in. Because here's these people who already know each other, and I'm coming in and they don't know me and I don't know them, and they're talking about all these things that I may or may not know about or agree with, and I don't know what I think about, and I'm supposed to interact with these folks I don't know about things that I'm struggling with. But if it's a group of friends, and somebody from within that group initiates a Bible study, there's already a relationship there. That could be a different thing. Mike Slaughter, I've heard him say multiple times, and I don't know if he originated it or if he got it from somebody else, that conversion often happens in rows where transformation happens in circles. So what worship offers you is that it offers folks is that opportunity to convert. That might be that first time believing conversion. I'm also of the opinion that God continues to convert us. It's kind of like peeling the onion, because I don't know what I haven't given over to God until I've given this one thing over, and then all of a sudden I realize, oh, I've got to give this over too. Oh, I've got to give that over too. Oh, this, you really need it. And so in worship can be those aha moments of conversion. But where real transformation often happens is around that circle, in the intimate setting of the small group and the conversation and the relationship that happened there. That being said, then then worship can be an easier place for someone to enter. Begin to build relationship, to then be invited to go into the small group and continue that relationship and that transformation. So the more frequent entry points would be service or worship than small group. But who am I to say that God couldn't work through a small group to bring somebody in? We've been talking a while.
All right, any more
Wonderful.
questions?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.